You can, I'm listening to the working crowd, but I want to have that's more time.
because, it's one right after the other, but I think they perfected their 15-second answers. So that would be a good thing for us this evening. The one thing that I want to say that I think is extremely important, besides it's chilly out here, is that we got to get to the polls. We're going to have an interesting election, first time.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and good evening to the candidates. Thank you for being here. My first question is, if elected, what is one approach that you would take differently than your predecessor as the biggest advocate for DC in Congress?
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me? All right. Thank you so much to everybody for being here. Thank you to our host. And I'm Trent Holbrook. For the past 8 years, I was on the front lines of every major federal fight for DC's future, working side by side with Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. And so whenever I started working with Congressman Norton, the DC statehood bill had been voted on only one time in U.S. history, in 1993, and it failed 2-1. They lost half the Democrats on the vote. And so I worked with Congressman Norton, with DC residents, with others, and we got over 100 national organizations to endorse the DC statehood bill, and we made it a national movement. Because of that, we took the bill from losing 2-1 to passing in the House of Representatives for the first time in American history. And so I would largely build on this incredible work that we've already put in for the past 8 years that we've been working on this. But the biggest thing that I've seen that we need to work on is just purely education. Whenever I talk with people, whenever I talk with members of Congress, with their staff, with outside organizations, the biggest thing is that people do not realize DC's situation. And so what I would do is try to educate more people about DC. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kenny Zalesny. I first met Eleanor Holmes Norton in 1995 when I was working in the White House, and she was 4 years into her service as our delegate. I had enormous respect for her then. I have enormous respect for her now. If I had to say 2 ways I would build on her tremendous leadership in this city. One, I would broaden the partnerships and alliances across Capitol Hill. She had some very devoted fans and allies who argued for us and fought on our behalf, but I believe I can broaden and deepen those relationships and alliances. And the second thing I would do differently, the reason I would do it differently is times have changed. We are under economic assault in this city in a way we have not been in my lifetime. So the delegate needs to do more, not just for autonomy, but for economy, for rethinking our economy to be less dependent on the federal government. And I'm the only one in this race with serious national business experience.
Good evening, I'm Councilmember Robert White. I'm a 5th generation Washingtonian, and I'm excited to be with you this evening. I had the privilege for years after law school working for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes, and she had a mean inside game. But one of the things I'm going to do differently is run a mean outside game. That means, yes, work within Congress, build alliances. I have the support right now of the Black Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, members of the House and the Senate. But I also want to make sure we elevate the national profile of this seat, because people can't support an issue that they don't hear about, that they don't see. I'm also going to change the argument for DC statehood. No longer am I going to argue that because it's the right thing to do. We should. But we're going to do it because that is the trump card for Democrats in the redistricting battle. It is in the interest of national Democrats, Democratic leadership, Democrats in California, Iowa, Texas. That is how we regain control. And so we put it in the interest of the Democratic Party, then we have them really behind us in statehood. I got a box of cards here, so that's what I'm thinking. That's our big joke. And that's the one we're going to play.
Well, I don't know about joker, but good avoiding of the phrase "the trump card" that this president has ruined for us. So I'm Brooke Pinto. I am so excited to be running to be your next congressional delegate. I, like has been stated, have a huge amount of respect and admiration for the way in which Eleanor Holmes Norton has led this office for my entire lifetime. And I want to build on her legacy, and I also want to do what Walter Fauntroy, who had this role first, did so effectively, which is go into communities across America and make sure that everybody knows it's an American interest for the nation's capital to have representation, just like every other American across this country. The other thing that I want to do differently and more of is be a messenger to grow our economy. We have to diversify our economy and make very clear to residents and businesses around the city, around the country, and around the world that DC is the best place to come, to live, to grow your business, and we can do that with an effective messenger on the Hill.
My name is Greg Yatsko. One way that I would be different from Eleanor, this is just my brain, so that's something unique. I came to Washington about 30 years ago to work with government and solving a number of difficult problems. One of the things I'll do specifically uniquely is to take that license plate slogan that we have about taxation without representation and change the focus from representation to taxation. I think, I know, we send over $30 billion to the federal government in federal income taxes every year, and we don't have full representation. So I want to focus on the taxation piece and make sure that we have taxation, no taxation until representation. And we can keep those federal tax dollars here in the district to work on some of the legacy issues we have with inequality across the district. We'll have more resources here to address that issue, and we'll have a message we can take across the rest of the country so that people will understand why we are different. Because it's easier for them to start to notice us when we're not paying federal income taxes than when we're just talking about representation.
Thank you so much. So my second question, kind of piggybacking off one of the answers given, is what do you see as your role in boosting economic equity in the district? And I want to start with you, Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah, so as I said, I think the job is 2 things. It's autonomy and economy. And in the economy part, we not only have to to rethink our economy to be less dependent on the federal government. But we have to make sure that the economic value and the benefits of that growth are spread equally and equitably across the district. For too long, it's been a tale of two cities. And I've lived here for 30 years. I've been a candidate for 9 months. And I have been scrutinizing the city to see what is it that we have in common as well as what divides us. I think we have so much room to understand one another better, to share the values and the value that this city creates. And as delegate, it's my priority to bring us new jobs, bring us new employers, and support the homegrown ecosystem that's starting up new jobs here.
Look, there's no economic equity without jobs. So first we got to get jobs going. We're going to work to transfer land like La Font Plaza so that we can build housing and businesses, get people to work on construction jobs and then permanent jobs in those places. But the other thing we're going to do is push back on Trump's agenda. They have been working to dismantle the disadvantaged business programs. Anybody who is black or a woman understands that you have started miles behind, years behind everybody else, which is the reason that Congress created the disadvantaged business programs. They are trying to get rid of that. We need to be pushing as hard in the right direction as they are pushing in the wrong direction. We also need to make sure we are keeping black representation in the Congress. This is going to be the largest loss of black representation since the end of Reconstruction, and we have to push back. These folks are doing the quiet things out loud. They're doing the unthinkable in front of our faces, and we need people who are going to be fighters and not back down from the fight when it matters. I know what's at stake, and that's why I'm going to fight so hard.
So, years ago, before I was on the council, I worked at the DC Attorney General's office, and I was in the tax section, and I was asked to prosecute a woman who had spent 12 years saving up money to start a hair braiding business. She had missed $200 on her tax form. And I went to the Attorney General and I said, I don't think this is right. We shouldn't be prosecuting a person for a clear mistake. We need to be helping our small local businesses get into business and accomplish their dreams. And so we set up clinics across the city, and that's what I've been doing my entire career, is fighting for economic opportunity and equity across the city. That's what we've done in the council, everything from the commander's deal to ensure that 15% of all jobs go to returning citizens, to ensure that we're including affordable housing opportunities, my bill to revitalize our business licensing to make it easy and cost-effective to get into business. And so when I'm in Congress, I want to first implement my housing plan to make it affordable to live in our city.
Well, one of the reasons why I decided to run in this election is because of what the Trump administration did to the federal workforce. And I'm not willing to give up on that federal workforce. We know in the district that it's a vital economic engine, and it's a vital pathway to the middle class for so many people in the district. So number one, we have to work to get those jobs back. So many people were let go inappropriately, and we have to get partisanship out of the federal government. So the effort, for instance, on Schedule F, to transfer positions to basically give the administration ability to fire people without cause. That's one thing we need to do. We need to get those jobs back. We need to get the dignity back so that young people want to go into those federal jobs. Secondly, of course, is to exempt the district from rental income taxes. I can think of no better economic driver of growth in the district than to exempt us from federal income taxes and have the head of 3M bring their headquarters from Minnesota here to the district. And then not only will people have opportunity here because of that, but people in Minnesota will start to understand why we are not a state.
So I've knocked on the doors of thousands of DC residents, had thousands of conversations since I first entered this race to run for Congress. And the one thing I hear over and over, again and again, is that it's not affordable to live here. Things cost too much. You can't afford your housing. You can't afford your medicine, and all these horrible things. And so one of the first things that I would do to help with affordability and living in DC is stop the illegal firings of our federal employees. That has been a huge drain on our local economy. Trump did it. It has been illegal. I worked with Congressman Norton daily since Trump came in and fought fought this every step of the way, and I would also continue my work to help with federal employee benefits like I did with Congressman Norton, helping with pay raises for federal employees, improving their retirement, all those types of things. I would also bring back DC's first-time homeowners tax credit when adjusted for inflation, which would be about $7,500 when you're buying your first home.
Jenny, can we lead questioning answers, with Brooke?
Oh, sorry. What did you say?
You go first. Brooke's going to answer first.
Oh, okay. Well, Harry, sorry. If we're going down the line, should Councilmember White answer first and then...
An even chance to answer questions in different groups. That's all I'm trying to do.
Okay. Okay, is everybody settled with their papers in order? Okay, so is everybody settled? Sorry, I know the wind did a number on us just there. Okay, President Donald Trump has had a fixation on public safety issues in D.C., and last summer he exercised power under the Home Rule Act to seize temporary control of D.C.'s police department for 30 days. Say you're in the delegate seat and this happens again. What is your plan? How would you use the delegate seat to respond? Councilmember Pinto, and then we'll move down the line.
So this is where relationships. This is where relationships and credibility really matters. I have spent my career working on advancing public safety in Washington, D.C., and working with members of Congress so that they understand who we are in Washington, that we are serious about public safety, and their interventions, like trying to take over our police department, are not helpful, are not instructive, and are not going to advance public safety. If they try to do it again, we'll deploy a similar strategy that is legal, community, and legislative. Legal, as we did successfully, the Attorney General Brian Schwab brought forward a lawsuit that a judge determined was illegal action for them to extend that federalization. Second, we cannot wait until they try to do that again. They will try to do it again, most likely. And so we have to set up the protections in place today to ensure that the federal government, if they want to be a partner with public safety, they know what they can do. They can fill our 22% vacancies on our courts. They can ensure that our ankle monitors aren't running out of battery. They can be real partners in public safety, but these partisan attempts to take us over are not productive and will not be tolerated by me on the council, nor as a delegate.
And just a quick follow-up, Councilmember Pinto. You mentioned Brian Schwab, like the Attorney General's office, but how would you use specifically the power of the delegate seat? What would you do as the delegate? Like, what would you personally do?
So, when I became the chair of the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, we had just had the experience where Congress had overturned the revised criminal code reform commission. And so I knew that we were at risk for that to happen again. And so I started going to Congress well before I ever moved legislation around safety to meet with all of the oversight chairs, to meet with members in both parties, in the House and the Senate, to introduce myself, explain what we were doing, what we were about, who we are in Washington, went to every community across the city and put together the largest package in our history, which ultimately passed unanimously. That's the same type of strategy I'll deploy as our delegate. We cannot wait for them to try to federalize again. We have to, and I will be our full-time quarterback on ensuring that all of those relationships are tightened and strengthened so that they know who we are in DC, what we will and will not tolerate, and how they can be a part of our public safety efforts. But overtaking us is not an option and not productive, and that's what we'll do.
Thank you. Candidate Yasko, we'll go to you next.
Well, so
I think fundamentally the biggest power that the delegate has is the ability to work within Congress to establish allies, to push back legislatively on these issues, and to vocally use all aspects of the media to the district to stand up to. You know, the attacks on the district are not going to stop. So we also need to be proactive in looking at forms of those home rule acts, for instance, shortening the time that Congress has to review legislation in the district. The district, the delegate can work with the council and the mayor to look at other initiatives, perhaps to use more temporary legislation, which does not have the same requirements for under home rule and to be implemented more quickly, so that the district begins to act offensively on some of these issues and not always in the defense, because that we need to do some things to keep the administration busy, like, for instance, exempting the district from federal income taxes. It's another way to proactively force the administration to respond to us rather than always to them.
Thank you. Kevin, go to you next.
So I worked with Congressman Norton when the president attempted to federalize MPD. And let me be clear, what he did was illegal. It did not follow the Home Rule Act or any other authority he had to try to federalize the Metropolitan Police Department. And so what we did, we fought that vigorously, and that's what I would do as delegates to continue that. But every single time you have one of these fights, one of these attacks on control, it's an opportunity as well. And that's what we saw in Congressman Norton's office, and that's what I would do as delegate. So for example, I would use this opportunity to further expand and get more co-sponsors on the District of Columbia District of Columbia Police Home Rule Act, which would remove this authority from the president. I also did things like using January 6th and President Trump clearing Lafayette Square to get greater co-sponsors on the District of Columbia National Guard Home Rule Act, which would give control over our National Guard to the mayor as opposed to having it with the president. And having National Guard troops in our streets, by the way, is also illegal. And so that's what I would continue to do, just exactly like I did with Congressman Norton.
And just to follow up for you, Kevin, before you run, you mentioned some longer term solutions, but in the short term, what would you do the day after he did that?
Educate people. Be calling every single member of Congress that you can. You call first your greatest allies, and you have them with you, and then you call people who have not been as great on DC home rule, and then you explain to them this is why we need home rule, this is also why we need statehood. And you use them, you have allies, and you use every process, the legislative process available to you, including, for example, the appropriations process. It's going to take probably Democrats to pass an appropriations bill, which is just federal spending. And so if President Trump tries to do whatever crazy illegal thing that he wants to, they use that as one of the levers. And there's so many other levers that you can use.
Candidates and Leslie.
So I served as counsel to the U.S. Attorney General, so I have a lot to say about crime and punishment and crime prevention. But on this issue, this takeover in our city was not about crime or punishment. It was a power play. And no matter what our crime stats had been, President Trump would have made up and manufactured this fake emergency in order to take power, in order to advance the racist tropes that he traffics in every day, and in order to discredit our city. Now, it doesn't help that it turns out the crime stats were manipulated. So we have weakened ourselves in front of a president and in front of a Republican Congress who are looking every day for reasons to claim that we're not capable of governing ourselves. So it's a bad situation all around.
I'll give you a follow-up, the same one. I mean, seriously, like it's the day after. What do you do?
Perfect. Okay, so because it's a fake issue and because it's a power play, the way you fight back is with a media campaign. You get on television right away, you get on social media right away, and you make it clear that these are lies, that this is a fabrication, that this is a part of a larger effort to discredit our city and take over our city. You don't contest on the merits about the crime numbers. You make it clear that this is an aggressive campaign to discredit our city, and you fight back with all the allies and partners that you have been cultivating, and you win that fight. You do not back down.
Councilmember White.
Let me pick up where Kitty left off. Everybody here knows that the president and this Congress want to federalize our police force. Now, while we're under that microscope, whistleblowers were telling the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Brooke Pinto, that the books are cooked. And instead of looking into it, she said, you know what? I like the cooked numbers because I'm going to run on those. That means it's less safe. That means that people who are facing violent crimes is not getting reported. It means people call and say, we need more police attention in our neighborhoods. And they look at the cooked books and they say, it look like there's enough crime in your neighborhood. And then now, we're under the federal microscope. They told the Judiciary Committee first, right? Beyond that, we have got to run a national media campaign. That's exactly right. The delegate pulls together the council chair, the mayor, the attorney general to stand together and make sure there's a correct narrative. This is exactly what I did last March when Congress stole $1 billion of our money. I said, you know what we used to do when I worked for Congresswoman Norton? We pulled everybody together for a press conference. And that's exactly what we did.
Stand up here for one more question. Sure.
It just makes me sad for our city when you say these mistruths knowingly, when it undermines our legitimacy as a city. That is right. There were manipulated crime statistics. And you know why we all know that now? Because of the oversight that I conducted with MPD. We had an investigation. We found out who was doing it. We had a public hearing. We sent public letters. We got the oversight committee and a response from the Democratic leadership about what was and is not true, and found that there are 13 members who were likely manipulating crime data. That is absolutely not acceptable. That will not be tolerated in this department, and the nation's capital takes that very seriously. So what we're not going to do, Mr. White, is use Donald Trump talking points to talk about our own local police department. We have thousands of members who show up every single day to do their best to keep us safe, and those 13 members should be penalized for their unacceptable behavior.
Councilmember White, do you want to respond in 30 seconds?
Yes. The fake umbrage.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Harry's telling me we got to move on.
Okay, I'm the only one that has a question.
Next question. Sorry. We're going to start with you, Councilmember White, for this one, and then we'll move to candidates Leslie and then left and then circle back around. What is the role of protest in this role, in your view? Would you ever be willing to get arrested or use civil disobedience as a tool, and on what specific issues?
We have to protect DC and home rule by any means necessary. If it means protesting, if it means getting arrested, we're going to have to do that. We cannot relent on the little piece of democracy that we have. In fact, when the next delegate is done with this seat, we had better have more democracy than we have. They are trying to take over this city piece by piece. And if we let them, then shame on us. From the illegal addition on the White House, to taking over the Kennedy Center, to taking over the Institutes of Peace, to taking over our public park, Haynes Point, the golf course, the bird watchers, the bikers. They are taking the city piece by piece, and we can't just sit there and be polite. If anybody watched the State of the Union last year, where the Democrats walked in with the like church fans that said like shame or something, that's not what time it is, right? If we sit down, they're going to steamroll us. Now, when there are opportunities to work together and compromise, we got to do it. But when they're throwing logos, we got to fight back.
Protest and arrest and civil disobedience are absolutely critical tools in the toolkit. And I have undertaken them, and I will continue to undertake them. But they are hardly the only approach. And if all we do is spin people up and get them marching on weekends and get them boiling on social media, we have not sufficiently served the city. We need to do protest, yes, but we also need strategies. We need alliances. We need partnerships so that we can constructively solve the problems that we're under. Our problems are harder than any other city's problems. Our delegate has to be twice as talented and twice as disciplined than any other member of Congress, because we're not given the same tools, and our problems are twice as big. So we need the full range of our toolkit. It includes protest, but it also includes strategy, partnership, alliance, persuasion, advocacy, education. And for 30 years, I've been doing those things on the national stage successfully.
So protest should absolutely be part of this. Congressman Norton came out of the civil rights movement and knows that better than anybody, of course. And that was one of the reasons that I was so proud to get to work with her. But like Kenny said, protest isn't enough. This isn't the only thing that we can be doing, and it can't just be DC residents who are out there. And so that's why we worked to make this a national movement for DC statehood. That's why I worked arm in arm with Congressman Norton to get over 100 national organizations to endorse the DC statehood bill. That way we're not out there just the 700,000 of the CDC. It's everybody else who has an interest in these issues. So we have so many organizations that any time they try to overturn our fuel efficiency standards, for example, we have all these great environmental groups lined up ready to go protest on top of the hill because we work to get them there. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and it's more than just talk and yelling. It's about doing the serious work, doing the issues back.
Yeah, so I think it's important that we identify the issues that are the most crucial issues in order to mobilize people around. And I think statehood is fundamentally that issue that encompasses so many different aspects of all the injustices we've talked about so far today. I think the issue of federal income tax becomes a good galvanizing effort to focus on statehood and focus on disadvantages. And we can start with an effort that's aimed at legislative action. And if that doesn't work, it's an action then that we can take that's within our control as a district. Figure out a mechanism to ultimately withhold funds from the federal government. It's a form of protest. It's an act of civil disobedience that, in fact, can actually make an impact. It's over $30 billion that goes to the federal government. So that is one way that we can mobilize people in the district to rise up and push back on this injustice of us sending $30 million to a federal government that we don't control that turns around and oppresses us.
Well, there is absolutely an important role for protest, and this is a way that everybody can be a part of what we're all fighting for, and we need you to be. That's what we did when Trump tried to federalize our city. We protested. I was out there marching in the streets. I was in the national news almost every night. And you know what that did? I got hundreds of emails from people in Wisconsin and Florida and Tennessee who said, we saw you, how can we help? Because we now see why this is an interest to all Americans. And we protested. But we protest in all sorts of ways. When Congress tried to take $4 billion from our healthcare system, which would have kicked 20,000 Medicaid beneficiaries off coverage and eviscerate our local hospitals, I went to our members and built a coalition of stakeholders to get them to walk that back successfully. Was that protest? Absolutely. Was I doing that in the streets? No. And so this position, and that's why I use this phrase quarterback, this position has to quarterback all of those tools to make sure we're all part of the fight.
All right. Well, I wanted to kind of follow up on what Jenny was talking about. I kind of flipped a little bit on its head. The flip side of protest and fighting is obviously compromise, and it's a reality of the office that you are all seeking, even more so if Democrats remain in the minority. There's simply no way that you or the district will get absolutely everything it wants, especially with Republicans wanting very different things. So I want to put a scenario out there and get into a question. Let's say Republicans come to you, you're the delegate, the Republicans come to you and they say, listen, we will lay off of messing with the city's legislation, the budgets, but you guys have to give up the TAG program, which gives money to students to go to college. Would you make that sort of deal? How much would you compromise, and is there a line you would not cross when it comes to negotiating with Republicans? And we can start from Greg and then go down.
Great, I get the first hypothetical. Well, look, honestly, I don't think it's worth negotiating on hypotheticals. The issues, TAG program is an important program for the district, certainly. Obviously, statehood is also an important issue. Principle of this issue, if we were to get statehood, for instance, yes, that's an acceptable alternative, because with statehood, we could certainly establish our own programs to provide scholarship programs for students within the district. We exempt the district from federal income tax. We would also have again, I think, with statehood, we get many things, and we get the ability to do many things that we have to get the Congress to do for us now. So yes, in that case, it seems like based on that, as I understand the hypothetical, that's one that we would take.
Yeah, Councilman Pinto.
So no, I would not negotiate that way. In order to be taken seriously, we have to be serious. That is not a serious recommendation for a Republican to make. Our DC TAG program empowers tens of thousands of our residents to go to school, to go to college. That's, again, not only a DC value, that's an American value. And that is the case I will make, I believe, effectively, to a bipartisan audience and protect DC TAG. When it comes to will back off the district if you do X, Y, or Z, I don't trust that they will back off the district. They're going to continue coming after us over and over again, which is why every time we have to be very serious about showing them it's not acceptable, we will not stand for it, and we know what we want in our communities. We know that everybody deserves the right to be safe, that everybody deserves an opportunity to get ahead and to prosper. We know we deserve autonomy over our own budget, and if we want everyone else to know that, we have to mean it when we say we know it.
Look, if it's a negotiation, then I'm going to try to negotiate. So if you can have DC TAG, if you allow us to tax income at its source. If DC can do what every other jurisdiction in this nation can do, which is tax the people who work there, who don't live there, we would have enough money to pay for DC TAG. Matter of fact, we could pay for full college tuition for every DC resident. So I'm up for negotiating if they want to negotiate. But I don't believe that these folks are really trying to negotiate. So I wouldn't trust it for a second. In history, there are times where you can work in a bipartisan nature. And I can't wait till we reach that time again. But that time is not now. Like, these folks are not, they're not compromising. They're not trying to be bipartisan. They're not going to put their neck on the line and stand in front of the Trump train or the Freedom Caucus with the District of Columbia. So they're not intent in negotiating any good faith. If I say more, it's going to be reckless. Sorry.
So I agree that you certainly can't trust that kind of approach at face value. But I kind of love the question because because what leaders do have to do is choose between competing values. And we're out of practice at that in DC because we don't ever have the authority to fight for something in Congress, so we aren't ever really asked which thing is more important. So in my travels as a candidate, I have come to think that I don't know how DC voters would go if they had the choice between statehood and economic prosperity. Like, if we could only have one first, which would we pick? So that was a long way of saying this kind of question would prompt me to do massive research across the city, to do massive referendums, to ask DC voters, really, if you have this opportunity before you, what will you trade it for? I think we need more of a citywide conversation on these very hard questions.
So having worked on these issues intimately for the past 8 years, I really don't think that's what Republicans are going to do. I feel like I unfortunately know how Republicans think on these issues way too well, having been up there. And so I agree, if there's room to compromise, absolutely compromise, but that's never the way that these things work out. And so I think what you need to do instead is look at legislative opportunities that you have. Congressman Norton was always ranked as one of the most effective lawmakers on Capitol Hill during the time that I was there. And the reason is because we knew how to move our bills. And so if there's a legislative vehicle that's coming through, if there's a bill that must pass, we did everything we could to try to attach our own bills to that bill. And that's one of the reasons that she was so successful. And so it's not always about compromise, but it's always about pursuing DC's advantages at every single legislative opportunity that you can.
Thank you. Well, I've got another hour worth of hypotheticals to go through, so we're going to be at this for a little bit. Similarly, President Trump has made no secret of his interest in, quote, beautifying the district. Whether it's building a new ballroom, a huge arch, repainting a reflecting pool right now, or redoing the East Potomac Park golf course. Now, many of these projects have drawn criticism, but there are others, like repairs to fountains that DC residents have not seen run in years, if not decades, have could benefit residents because we live in the city on a yearly basis. So I'm curious how you would approach working with Republicans either on the Hill or in the White House if they came to you and said, we've got a pot of money, there's a lot of federal land, a lot of federal parcels in the district, and we want to improve them, we want to beautify them, we want to change them. How would you respond, and would you work with them? And let's start with Mr. Holbrook, and then we'll go down.
So on this, where Trump has said that he wants to give money for DC, the one thing I've said is that I guess I am skeptically optimistic. I don't know if that makes sense, but it sounds good. And so I think, if there's any way that we can work with the administration to increase funding for our parks in DC, absolutely we should try to do that. But it always comes with strings attached, and so I would work to make sure that that doesn't happen. One thing that we used to do with Congressman Norton's office is we used to have regular meetings between the community and the National Park Service. And so that way, if people had issues with like the local park that's down the street that happens to be owned and regulated by the National Park Service, and there was an issue, constituents could raise that directly with NPS, and they were more likely to get an answer. So that's what I would try to do. There are also several boards that have control over DC zoning and different issues like that. They're quintessentially local issues, and I would work to make sure that those authorities come back to DC, and in the meantime, not have federal authorities on those commissions.
Yeah, I'm all for beautification, and I'm all for an extra $10 billion for this city. But we need to be really clear about what we think beauty looks like, what priorities are in this city, what we desperately need money for. And if people can't afford their homes, then we need to help them with that problem. If people can't afford their groceries, we need to help with that problem. So if there's $10 billion available from the federal government for this city, we as a leadership team in this city have to be really clear what our priorities are. And we will be a much more beautiful city if people can afford to live here, if people can keep their kids in school here, keep their families safe here. That's how you begin to build a beautiful city. And then we can get to the aesthetic, jewels that Trump likes later on.
Look, if Trump offers $10 billion to beautify the city, I don't think he cares enough about the people here to allow us to use it for other things. If he does, we're going to do it, but he's not going to do that. Here's what we do. When I was a kid, we used to drive down 16th Street on the way to church. And there's a bridge that goes over Rock Creek Park, and there are lions on the other side. They're green. And then they were coming for a while, and one day we go to church, and they're bronze. And I said, Dad, they messed up the color of the lions. And he said, that's the color they're supposed to be. You know what color they are now? They're green. Because the federal government doesn't take care of things. It is in our interest. If you want to invest the money to beautify the city, we'll take it. But then we need to work through a public-private partnership or partnership, an intergovernmental partnership, to say, you pay billions of dollars to beautify, we're going to take care of it. Because that means we're going to get more tourist dollars. We're going to have more beautiful parks. And in fact, if we can push it a little further and allow them to allow us to take control of it, so I can have a sip of wine or some coffee with my kids play in these circle parks around the city, then I think we're better for it. So we've got to take these lemons and make lemonade, and we have an opportunity to do that here.
So luckily, this one actually is not a hypothetical. So when the National Guard troops were sent in from around the country, I said to them, not only is this not necessary, we don't want you here, but if you're going to be here, we cannot have armed troops around our schools, which they no longer are. I then said, if you're going to be here, we need your help with the parks. We need tens of millions of dollars to turn our fountains on, and went to the leadership to do that. Fountains are now turned on. There is $10 billion that we are going to receive from the federal government. President Trump has laid it out. It still needs congressional approval. These conversations are happening every single day to make sure that we do prioritize DC interests, which is why it is so important that someone from DC is at the table, like I am, to make sure that we can fund Union Station renovations, to make sure that we can fund our bridges and our parks, to ensure that even in this administration, priorities that we need, like renovations for our firehouses, are on that list. So we're not going to agree with Republicans on everything, but what we can and must do is ensure that our priorities are met where they can be, which they are right now.
Well, I think this question just shows how far we've fallen as a nation. Because the very notion that we're talking about the president giving the district $10 billion is so far from how our Constitution is established. So in the Constitution, you go to the Appropriations Committee website, and it's up there, it always used to be. It is the Congress that dictates where federal dollars go. No money can be taken from the Treasury without an act of Congress. So this notion that Trump will be doling out $10 billion is part of this kind of, Kenny has used the word tyranny, the tyrannical fantasies of the president. So this is a hypothetical notion because Congress will not likely give a $10 billion funds to the National Park Service, for instance. Congress will likely, if they're going to provide $10 billion to the district, do it in a way that is divided among different agencies and different authorities who have the legal authority to distribute funds to the district. So in that case, yes, the delegate has to have a role to shape as part of the appropriations process where funds can go to the district.
So first question, second round. So in the last year alone, we've seen Washingtonians undergo a lot of major changes from the federal occupation to the loss and transformation of long-standing community landmarks and investments. So my question to you all, well, in the midst of that, a lot of residents felt their voices have been silenced. So my question to you all is, beyond championing statehood, what kind of steps would you take to ensure that your residents feel seen and heard and rebuild that public trust throughout DC? We're going to start with Councilmember Pinto, please.
Well, I'm going to do that the same way that I've been doing my entire career. When I met with a mother just down the street from here who told me that she lost both of her children to gun violence and asked me not to sleep well at night until I did something about it. I said, I cannot do this alone. I have to do this with our community. And I went to every single neighborhood, every ANC commission, every civic association, and on neighborhood walks at 6 in the morning and 1 in the morning and every hour in between, and put together the largest public safety package and bill in our city's history, Secure DC, that passed unanimously and was not overturned by Congress and drove down violent crime across our city. And so that's how we have to tackle all of the next big challenges, whether that's tens of thousands of people who've lost their jobs through these Doge firings, whether that's people who have been displaced or at risk of being displaced because their housing is too expensive. That's why I've rolled out my housing plan called Breaking Ground DC, which is a federal housing plan to drive down costs. That's how we do it.
Greg, we can go to you next.
Yeah, it's, the district, one of the advantages of the district is represented in the district. It's a fairly compact area, so you can get to all the neighborhoods, get to all the communities, and meet with people and understand the priorities. It's really important as the delegate, though, to make progress on issues. One of the things I found throughout my time in government is that it's key to actually make progress. So you build trust through accomplishing a very specific task. There are many, many challenges in the district, and we cannot solve all of them at once. This expression, if we prioritize everything, we prioritize that. So the key is to try and figure out what are the key issues that we can identify for the communities on, bring federal dollars or federal resources to bear to address them. One issue that we're going to get to our last question is the notion of parking. So I think we need a wholesale transfer of parks, national park land back in the district, except for things like the memorial and whatnot. The obvious monuments and memorials in the district. We need all of those properties back in the district so the district can use them to provide areas for juveniles, for kids to be able to have activities so we can address issues with property.
So I would do largely what I've been doing with Congressman Norton for so long and during this campaign, and that is going out and meeting directly with residents. One of the nice things about being the DC delegate as opposed to being a member from Colorado or somewhere else is that you don't go home every weekend. You are home every single weekend. And so Congressman Norton used to have meetings all the time with residents every single day. We could talk with residents, we could talk with our local officials, and that's one of the most important things we should do. One of the, greatest and saddest things that I got to do with Congressman Norton is I met with so many federal employees who had just lost their jobs with the federal government. I met with hundreds of them whenever Donald Trump came in. and seeing their stories, hearing what they have to say, I knew what was happening was bad, but it just personifies it, and that helps with me. And it also helps, whenever you take those members and meet with other members of Congress to do that. And, these federal employees, they care about the issues that they've been working on, and they also care about the jobs. They care so much about the things that they were doing, the causes they were working for. And being able to connect with a community like that is just critically important for any elected official.
One of the first things I will do as DC delegate is reopen a constituent services office here in Ward 8. There used to be one. Eleanor Holmes Norton had one here for many years, but she closed it. And now the only constituent services office is by the White House, which is not convenient to any of the 700,000 of us who might want to seek out federal services. So my first commitment is to reopen the constituent services office here. Second, I may be one of the only people in this city who actually loves ANC meetings. I find that, and I've been to a lot of them in every ward, and I find the hyper-local government and the seriousness and professionalism with which these volunteers take their jobs, I think that is the thing most likely to save us from tyranny. In DC, we have this amazing, public service in our blood. And so, as a delegate, I will be at those ANC meetings regularly and hearing concerns from the bottom up.
DC does not have a vote, but we do have a voice. And if I'm a delegate, I'm going to make sure that they hear that voice. But they're not just going to hear my voice, because that's not enough. When I worked for Congresswoman Norton, one of the things that disappointed me was that I didn't see school kids in that Capitol every single day, taking tours and asking members of Congress, why are you voting against DC? Why do your residents have a vote on the floor and we don't? Let them explain that to the young people. But then they need to hear our voice beyond DC too. We need to be in every congressional district of someone who votes against DC's interests in strong numbers. I believe that people are so angry and scared now that they are ready to do work that we have never been ready to do. To show up every single time folks vote against DC so that they know there are consequences when you do it. Right now, there are no consequences when you vote against DC, and too many times members of Congress do, including Democrats. We are going to change that. And I'm going to be in communities every day, just like I am as a council member, making sure I hear your voice so that the voice that I am shouting in the Capitol is yours and not just mine.
Councilmember White, you'll be getting up again because you're first for this next question. But I did want to start with you specifically because you touched on this earlier. So last year, Congress, with Maryland deleting and Congress to get back the $1 billion funds from the district. Should that take place in your first year of office? I want to know how exactly would you work to ensure that cash flow remains, and what are some of those priorities in terms of agencies and finding out where to hit first?
So a couple things. One, the delegate has to know when this is coming down the pipe, right? Our job is to keep the ear to the ground, so we need to make sure we know that this is coming. I want to be clear on the language. The Congress didn't take it back. They stole. It wasn't theirs to take back. It was our money. They stole it. When they do that, if they do that again, I'm calling on my friends. I've been endorsed by the Congressional Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus. I'm going to make sure I'm turning to my friends first and say, look, it's time to fight back. But we're going to be fighting not from the minority position, but the majority position, because we're going to make sure we win back Democratic control of Congress. And when we do, we are going to demand that Democratic leadership not just give lip service to DC. That's not enough anymore. We need them to really support our priorities. That is one of the reasons that our delegate mobilizing DC residents across the nation is so important. They're not going to listen just because they're there. They're going to listen because there are consequences. They're going to listen because we act in numbers. They're going to listen because we mobilize. So our job is to stop that. The last thing I'm going to do is work my butt off on a strategy to get onto the appropriations committee. Because short of having a vote on the House floor, that is the most power we will ever have to fight with in Congress.
Okay, the first thing, it was a huge mistake what happened last March. And the way to have prevented it was to have been proactive and vigilant ahead of time. It should not have been a surprise that Trump has a lot of antipathy and hatred for this city. It should not have been a surprise that we were going to end up with the short end of the stick. We might not have known exactly how, but we should have foreseen that he would treat us like a federal agency and freeze our locally raised tax dollars. So, as delegate, I will make sure I am never behind the 8 ball. I will always be proactive and vigilant. Having already built the relationships and partnerships and alliances, I need to always know what's happening, what's coming around the corner. And if it happens anyway, or when new things happen, that we have to be on the defense on. It's get on TV, get on social media, get our allies and partners across Congress and across the nation. It's not enough to send DC residents out to all different districts around the country and think that's going to win us what we need. We need to be more strategic. We need to go where the power is and the people who influence the people voting against us.
So the main thing that you need to do, like Ray said, is you have to work with your allies whenever this type of thing happens. And this is what I did on the Hill for the past 8 years, was build allies for DC statehood, for DC home rule, for all these important things. And yes, sometimes there are going to be attacks, and sometimes we're not going to win on every single attack. But the most important thing is using every single attack that comes to expand our home rule, and using every attack that we can to keep building the arguments for DC statehood. Whenever we had $1 billion cut from our budget, we saw school children on Capitol Hill saying that they didn't want to see their teacher fired. Let me tell you, that is the best advocacy that you could possibly do. And you use these opportunities, and we did. Whenever we had the $1 billion cut, we gained statehood co-sponsors. Whenever we had National Guard in the street, we used that to pass the District of Columbia National Guard Home Rule Act, and we got more co-sponsors on that bill. So it's knowing the process, knowing what's coming, and having that expert insider expertise and advancing DC causes on those every single step of the way, no matter what comes at you, whether it's good or whether it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of good ideas here about what we need to do, and the question is, who are the best people to do it? So I've worked both in the House and the Senate side of Congress. I understand how the process works. I understand how both sides of the Capitol work. I've also run a federal agency, so I understand how bureaucracy works. I understand how to get things done without legislation. So ultimately, there are going to be many challenges and many attacks on the district that will continue, especially when we have an antagonistic president and an antagonistic Congress. So the key ultimately is to get statement, because that is the only protection we have ultimately against all of these challenges. And they will continue to come up, and when they come up, we'll have to use all the relationships across the bill, the communication that's being suggested to get the message out and to get people to understand that this is injustice and it's not right and it needs to stop. But the other thing we need to do is we also need to on defense. We need to find areas in which we continue to attack them so that we have something for them to do.
So, what happened when Congress stole $1 billion on our budget was that 5 anti-DC Republicans would not budge on fixing it, even though everybody else, for the most part, was in agreement with fixing it, even the administration. But the Speaker didn't want to change his mind on it because no one would exchange their leverage for it. And so we did what we do with any big mistake that happened. We learned from it and made sure that that never happened again. That's why I built a coalition with Senator Brooks and Senator Warner and all of our partners around the region to make sure that in next year's budget we got all of the funding returned and restored to not be treated like a federal agency. That's why I'm proud to have Senator Brooks' endorsement in this race, because she's seen what we can do together in building a coalition to protect the district. It's also what I did and time again over the last 12 months when our city and our budget have been under attack. We were proactive about it to beat back dozens of things that would have happened but for those coalitions. They're not just going to happen with the Progressive Caucus. I'm so grateful for them to be with DC, but we have to expand the tent to get the protections we can.
Republicans in Congress, and sometimes, often they're joined by some Democrats, have had a particular focus on overturning laws or instituting new DC policies that relate to public safety and the criminal justice system, whether that's bills moving through Congress right now that reduce second chances for people who are serving long prison sentences, or that abolish the independent attorney general's office. How would you grade city leaders' current approach to these public safety related attacks, and what would you do to improve it? And we'll start with you, Mr. Holbrook, and then down the line.
So I worked on justice issues for the past 8 years with Congressman Norton, doing every single fight that we could to bring back our autonomy in the criminal justice system. And so, for example, we have bills to try to bring back our courts and make it to where the president does not appoint the judges of our courts. There is no reason that our judges should be nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. There is no reason that our local laws should be enforced by the U.S. attorney, who is not accountable to us. And so those are the things that I would work on. And you mentioned overturning criminal laws. Congress recently overturned D.C.'s Revised Criminal Code Act. D.C.'s been over a decade writing this. But what happened was too much of the argument was focused on just one thing, carjackings, and that's all you heard. It didn't go into the details that this bill took a decade and they did what every other state did. So the biggest thing they have to do on all of these issues is educate people. Tell people that we're 700,000 residents. We're the same as everybody else. And there's no reason to treat us any differently. There's no reason to overturn our laws. And there's no reason that we shouldn't have control over our criminal justice system or any other local issue.
Just to follow up there, I mean, what would you do specifically that's different than what city leaders have done so far? I mean, I think that education piece has been tried.
Sure. So I think the education piece is absolutely critical, and we can't stop with that. And that's what we've seen over and over. The more that members of Congress learn what DC is about, the more they're open to DC home rule and DC statehood. So I know I said this before, but when I started the DC statehood bill, it fell 2-1 in 1993. We got so many of those members who had voted against the bill to co-sponsor the bill and support the bill. And it's all about educating people on who we are and what we do.
Candidates, Leslie.
I think the question was how would we grade the members of DC Council on the current city leaders?
Current city leaders.
Okay. So I would give Mayor Bowser a B. I think she was in an impossible situation. She had to be a good cop and bad cop at the same time, and that's metaphysically impossible. She was very worried we'd lose home rule. At the same time, she had to protest the outrageous and illegal federal overreach. I would give the members of DC Council maybe a C+, because it's not fair that we have a harder burden than everybody else. But when that's true, you cannot commit unforced errors. You cannot give Trump and the Republicans fodder to say that we can't govern ourselves. So if you don't oversee MPD properly, you get a bad grade. If you don't support the enfranchisement of DC voters through Initiative 83, you get a bad grade. That exposes us, it makes us weaker on the Hill when we ask them to expand our franchise.
This is where it's important to have a delegate who knows what's at stake. I'm a believer in second chances, right? I'm also a believer in logic. So we have tried decade after decade to incarcerate and police our way out of problems. And what have we resulted in? It's resulted in a country that incarcerates more people than anywhere else in the world and has a higher violent crime rate than anywhere else in the world. And we got a candidate talking about fire. And I'm talking about like civil liberties and justice. And we can't roll over every time Republicans get mad. We got to be strategic, but like these are real people's lives that you're talking about. Imagine if Republicans were on the other side. You think they'd roll over? No, they didn't. They push back. They say these policies that you're pushing don't work. They say these policies of over-incarceration are making our cities and our families less safe. We got to speak the truth, even when we are in a weaker position. And so I'm not going to grade the council because I'm trying to be the delegate, and I'm going to be the last person to criticize the mayor and the council because that's a role where you got to respect them. So I'm going to end it there.
So you want to talk about real people's lives. I met somebody, another mother, who watched her son be shot by their neighbor. That shooter came home that next night. Those are some of the stories that became part of our analysis in changing our pretrial detention rules. For very limited instances, for the most violent crimes, to say that a judge could hold someone pretrial for things like homicide and rape. Okay, we passed that law. Not all of us voted for it, but we passed the law. Now, we have Republicans trying to institute cash bail in our city, which we have not had in over 30 years in DC, which is absolutely unjust. We cannot be measuring someone's ability to pay if they're going to jail. We should be measuring someone's risk and danger to society. The only thing that is saving us from even our Democratic friends from voting for that cash bail is the fact that we changed those pretrial laws. So yes, we keep the people in mind, and we keep the results in mind to protect our people and our city.
Councilmember Pinto, do you want to give a grade to city leaders on the response to this issue so far?
Well, city leaders, like Congress, are not a monolith. And so we all have different strategies, and we're not always singing from the same song sheet. But we have learned a lot in the last year and a half of how to deal with this administration, how to navigate people in Congress who are not always looking out for us. And I feel very confident with what I have learned over the last year and a half with this administration in this environment as the chair of the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety to be able to navigate this in the future most effectively.
Candidate Gaskin.
I'm not going to grade any of the city leaders because fundamentally it's not the city leaders that are really responsible for this. I mean, we take a lot of burden on ourselves for what is an impossible task. We're all running to be the delegate to Congress. We get all these questions about what we're going to do, what we're going to do, but we don't have a lot of them. And the people we should be criticizing are the members of Congress who are spending their time and effort on issues that affect local DC governments. They should be focused on issues that affect their constituents in California or Oregon or Wyoming or wherever it is. So, though we have to keep that in mind. That is the problem. Well, we're not perfect. None of us up here are perfect. The mayor is not perfect. But they're not fundamentally the problem. The problem fundamentally are Republicans, primarily, and Trump, who are trying to use the district as an experiment in policy-making distraction because they cannot get anything done on an actual substantive agenda, so they attack the district. So I give them that.
All right, this is certainly less impactful than talking about criminal justice policies, but it's still something that has come up in the course of the campaign and is something Congress does control and can make a change to. As you all know, the city's skyline is shaped by the Federal Height Act. I think in recent debates, or in some of the debates you guys have all spoken in different capacities about making changes to the Height Act and pushing that forward. And I'm just curious, and you guys can go quickly through this, it doesn't have to be too complicated. What sort of changes would you like to see made to the Height Act? Are we talking full repeal, or are we talking repeal in certain parts of the city? Like, how do you say, how would you see yourself pushing forward on making changes to the Federal Height Act? And let's start with Greg and then come down this way.
Well, I think the answer is simple. I would support full repeal of the Height Act. It's fundamentally a local issue, not zoning in the district. So, it's one of these issues that frustrates me a little bit because we have people in the district who are advocating for preserving the Height Act, for instance, because they are concerned about what are fundamentally local DC zoning issues. And that's where we get ourselves into trouble because we either have to really endorse home rule and statehood 100%, not when it's convenient or not or inconvenient. So this one is simple. We should abolish the Height Act and let DC governments figure out what are appropriate heights for buildings across the city. And of course, most right now height restrictions are really established by local DC zoning laws anyway. So we're not even really approaching the Height Act in most of the city. But it's fundamentally a local issue, so repeal is this.
So I have laid out my federal housing plan called Breaking Ground DC, and one of the first things that it calls for is a repeal of the Federal Height Act. I think we should replace a version of the Height Act at the local level so that our local elected leaders in our community can determine what works best for us. Every neighborhood is different. Of course, we're not going to become New York. We don't want to become New York. But there are lots of areas where we can and should build higher. And by many estimates, we think if we do build higher and build denser and build more housing above transit, we can reduce the average cost of rent by $1,000. We are out of sync with the nation on our skyrocketing cost of housing. We have displaced tens of thousands of Black Washingtonians, number one reason because of the cost of housing. And so this is vital to our home rule, to our autonomy, to our affordability, and to our goals to ensure that all of us can afford to live and stay in Washington.
The conversations around the HIDE Act are mostly about housing, right? The last congressional hearing on the HIDE Act was the one that I put together when I worked for Congresswoman Norton. There is a local HIDE Act that is lower than the federal HIDE Act. And in many places in D.C., we have not yet built to the local HIDE Act. So start there. Second thing is, we have a downtown with a whole lot of empty office buildings. When I got to the D.C. Council in 2016 and started advocating for converting offices to residential, most people laughed at me, said it was ridiculous. And now we find ourselves behind the time. On the HIDE Act, on the federal HIDE Act, I'd be open to some adjustments, but not near one adjustment while Trump is in office. That is the last person I want to be in charge of the federal government if D.C. lifts the federal HIDE Act. Can you imagine what that would look like? I mean, this dude is building an arch. He's taking over the golf course. The biggest building in D.C. would be a Trump building. So, heck no, while he's in office.
I support amending the HIDE Act strategically so that we can build more housing, not to disrupt the downtown skyline, but to build more housing near metros and to reduce the cost across the board. Now, I will say, as the DC council members on the panel pointed out, we haven't yet built to our local limit. Why not? Like, who is running this city? Why haven't we built up why haven't we built more affordable housing if we're able to right now? What do you mean, like, oh, we should do that? Well, aren't you guys in charge? In fact, aren't you even the chair of the housing committee? So these aren't abstract issues. These are things that should have been done. We need more housing in this city. We should build it according to the current laws, and then we should amend federal laws as needed strategically in another administration in order to get the affordable housing we need in this city. It's not that complicated.
So, from the outset, let me just say, Congress is not going to repeal the HIDE Act. That's not going to happen. And so what we need to do is we need to think strategically about what we're going to do to increase development in D.C. And so that's going to include reforming part of the HIDE Act, and how we determine that it's going to be by having community members come together, elected officials come together, and figure out what the best proposal is going to be coming forward. And then we also need to have other approaches, like land transfers. So I worked with Congressman Norton, for example, on the transfer of the RFK and so knowing what those opportunities are, knowing what members of Congress are going to work with to get those done, it's going to be critically important. So, for example, with RFK, we worked with Republicans. It was a Republican Congress, it was a Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee who pushed this bill. And so having those relationships, knowing the process, that's going to be vital as we come together and decide what we're actually going to do going forward on this issue.
All right. You guys have given us all the political issues, but you're also people with personalities who lived in D.C. for quite a while, so I'm sure you have preferences and thoughts about the city itself. Imagine, again, another hypothetical, hypotheticals. Imagine a situation where you are elected delegate, Congress is still controlled by Republicans, you get a chance to invite Speaker of the House Mike Johnson out for a meal, for a coffee, for a drink, for a stroll around a park, to make all the pitches you need to make about D.C. and why D.C. should be left alone. Where do you take them? Where do you take him and why? And let's start with Trent. You're closest, so let's go with you.
I think you have to be biblical, right? Like, that is just the quintessential DC place. And I think it's great, though, because it shows really what DC is. You get to see the Houston corridor, and it really highlights the fact that we are normal Americans. We're 700,000 in the corridor just like everybody else. And so by taking them somewhere like that, you can show what DC really is all about. We're not just lobbyists. We're not just, members of Congress who are living in DC. It's about community. It's about residents who live here, who go to school here, who work here, and who do so many jobs and different things that's not related to the federal government. And we shouldn't have our local affairs money.
Well, I like that idea. I can't copy it now. My family for whatever reason, has a special place in our heart for Cactus Cantina. I have 4 kids. They're old now, 18 to 23, but every weekend of their entire lives, we went there. So I want to be on my home turf when I'm dealing with the speaker. I want to be where the waiters know me and where I know what to order without having to look at the menu. So that's what I would do.
I love to take Mike Johnson out on the town. So I bring him right here to Ward 8. We would start at the Go-Go Museum, a building that exists because I saved it from being taken over when that building was being sold. And then I bring him right up the road to Blaze Lounge because I like a heavy floor and I like my fish fry hard. And we want to do both of those things there. And he'd have a good time with me.
I think we don't understand my content players much, but yeah, that's what I have all the time.
Well, first I take him to the 11th Street Bridge Park. And I think that project really represents some of the best of who we are in DC, of both celebrating our past and bringing people together to create spaces that work for every family and every age. And have him see the vision for what we can accomplish for DC with a true partnership with the federal government. And then, because he's from Louisiana, people are usually more giving when you give them the food that they like. I would maybe take him to Delphine's, which has great beignets and Louisiana foods.
I hope I get invited from Ron. I'd probably take him to Anacostia Park because I think that is just a reflection of all of this national park land that, if it were transferred to the district, could really be put to much better use for the district. It's a beautiful area that has tremendous potential for recreation areas, and it also reflects the challenges that we have in the district, including up Anacostia. So much of the land that borders the Anacostia is controlled by the National Park Service. So any effort to try and clean up the Anacostia restricted by National Park Service regulations and the federal government processes for working permits and other processes that make it take too long. So I would do that, and then I would call it Robert and say, take it to these other places too.
All right, so we want to thank the journalists for their questions. So thank you very much. We're going to do something a little bit unusual. We're going to try to get the candidates to speak, not to ask questions of one another. So I've got 5 notes here, 5 cards, and I'm going to go down the line, and you guys are going to pick one. Whoever you pick, you get to ask a question too. It's going to be 1 round. Those are the rules. If you don't like the rules, you don't participate. But there's no freelancing questions one to the other. It's what comes out of you. Fair? You all doing it? Good. Here we go. Put it back in. Anybody pick themselves yet? Yep. Yes. Put it back. Are we good? I did. Let's see what it says. Let's start this way. We'll try to go this way. Thank you.
So, I am Councilmember White. So, Councilmember White, you've consistently completed our work in Congressman Norton's office. You were legislative counsel, I was senior legislative counsel. You left after not getting a promotion, and I helped lead the DC statehood bill to House passage twice. So, I want to know, what did you ever do during your time there to advance DC statehood? Because I certainly haven't seen it, and it felt like I was left to create a national movement, essentially, when you didn't step up.
Great question. I'm glad you asked it. It actually shines a light. We both work for the same person, but you take a lot more credit for her work than I do. because I think we've got to put respect on her name. You're not moving anything in that office without her name. It's her name and not yours. Why we didn't move it further is because politics is different. Anybody who's worked in politics long enough knows that there are times you can get things done and there are times that you can't. And that was the time when we couldn't get things done. So look, I didn't leave when I didn't get promoted. I left when I got tired of working on economic development projects in the office, driving across the bridge east of the river and not seeing any economic development in my neighborhood and believing I could do more for communities like mine and families like mine in the DC Council. Okay, that's your question.
Everybody? So I would just point out that I worked there when Donald Trump was president. We've seen the greatest attacks on our home rule in our history. We've had over 100 100 bills, resolutions, everything introduced to overturn our laws. And yet we've made incredible headway on DC statehood, on DC autonomy, on getting a record number of co-sponsors on the bill. So again, we've made all this progress after you left. We got DC statehood through the House for the first time in American history. You didn't face those same obstacles, and so why didn't that happen?
It didn't happen because I worked there when Obama was president. And Obama wanted to be bipartisan. And the Democrats weren't going to do things that weren't bipartisan. And Trump moved further to the right. And so people on the left moved further to the left. And again, it's the cycle of politics. It wasn't you, Trent. It was politics. And it was the woman whose name is on the door, Eleanor Holmes.
Okay, my question is for Brooke Pinto. Brooke, except for summer internships, I believe it's true that you have never worked for a national organization or a national institution. But this is a national job. In fact, it's harder than all the other jobs in Congress because you have to wield influence without authority. How will you overcome that deficit?
Thank you for the question. Yes, that is true that I have a set of experiences that include managing a frozen yogurt shop, working at a tax firm, working at the landlord-tenant court, working for the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, and now serving as your council member for the last 6 years. I also have worked in the Senate, Senator Blumenthal's Health and Aging Fellow, where I fought to have hearing aids covered in Medicaid. I think I will do this most effectively, though, the same way that I've been doing this job for the last year and a half under this administration. And sometimes those stories are not told in the press, like with one I mentioned earlier, when Republicans were trying to take $4 billion from our healthcare system to kick tens of thousands of Medicaid beneficiaries off of coverage. I did that in not working for a national coalition. I created one. We went to Medicaid beneficiaries and sent them to members of Congress they would be persuaded by. Went to hospital CEOs and sent them to members. I went to employers in Georgia and Louisiana and Tennessee to send them to members they'd be persuaded by. And so that's how I know I can do this most effectively.
Bell ring anymore. I was going to donate Christmas money. Greg, I've enjoyed getting to know you across the campaign. You have worked in the House and the Senate, but you have never been an elected official. And the DC delegate role is a tough role because you don't have the same power and leverage. Why do you believe, having never held electoral office, that you can represent this entire city?
You know, it's a great question. I've enjoyed getting to know you and all the candidates here as well. So I worked on the Hill for a number of years, so I understand very well the legislative process. And from there, I went to nuclear rental organizations where I was at meetings. So in that time, I got to know very well the Washington process. What I've learned are very special skills about how you accomplish it. So I'm a very data-driven person. I think that's a good way to solve policy. I've had to build coalitions. I have testified and worked with many members of Congress in a large role like that. I have defended the budget of the agency against often a very antagonistic Congress and very successful when I was in that role, increasing my agency's budget consistently. So I have those skills to understand how Washington works, and as I've been on the campaign trail, I've gotten to know more and more people in the district to make sure that I can represent people. And fundamentally to me that comes down to values. What are the values you care about? For me, it's these issues I talk about, the inequality in the business. That's the problems that I want to solve.
I have Kenny Celeste. I guess actually I have a similar question to you, but perhaps in the inverse. You've talked a lot about building national coalitions and winning on the national stage. What does that actually mean in practice? What have you won on the national stage that has improved district residents' lives?
Yeah, 3 things, and I say them every time I give my opening statement, which we didn't do tonight. But when I was at the Justice Department, I beat back the Republican efforts to kill after-school programs. That was the first major federal investment in after-school programs, and they were the same as they are now, and they tried to kill it at every turn. But we won that fight, and those programs helped bring down crime in this city faster and farther than had ever happened before. When I worked in the White House, I fought to make sure that every school and library in the city, especially east of the river, was wired for the internet. So that too was a brand new technological revolution, and it was almost the next civil rights divide. But the Clinton-Gore administration made sure that didn't happen, and I was part of that leadership. And then when I ran a nonprofit called Peer Forward in Adams Morgan, we helped thousands of DC students become the first in their families to go to college. I was part of the movement that drove the college enrollment rate in this city from under 40% to over 60%, and Barack Obama recognized our success by giving us a big portion of his Nobel Peace Prize money.
So you talk a lot about working for Congressman Norton. Talk about the things that you learned from her and the areas in which you think that you will be different.
That's a great question. So I've mentioned before, Congressman Norton, I knew her actually before I started working for her. She was my law professor before I went over to the Hill and started working with her. And the biggest thing I think I learned from her is, first off, the critical importance of all these issues. I mean, these are heartfelt to everybody who works on these things, especially her. And then you learn about the legislative process. It's no joke. The legislative process is extremely complex. And she was a wonderful, magnificent professor before law school, walking us through these wild things that Congress can and has done, and then seeing it in practice every single day for 8 years was impactful. Beyond belief.
Excellent. Well, thank you. That worked better than I thought it was going to work. Questions from the audience?
Okay, thank you. We have, we're going to get to do 2, and I'm going to wrap one question. I'm going to wrap a question from one into the other, because I think it's important. And one is, DC is home to many immigrants. So what will you do to, if elected, to protect immigrant residents, but also to protect some of the benefits that they've had, like health insurance, housing protections? What would you do to protect immigrants in the district? How's that start?
This is a very personal issue for me. My father was an immigrant to this country. He's passed away, but when Trump came into power, immigrated from Venezuela. And when Trump came into power, I was very concerned, quite frankly, that if my father still been alive, that he might have been subject to a denationalization effort or some other effort to attack the immigrant community. And so, I mean, it's like so many of the things that we've talked about tonight. It fundamentally comes down to using the power, the full power of the delegate to protect the vulnerable people in our community. That means getting ICE out of the community. It means getting the National Guard out of the community. It means working to actually pass comprehensive, sensible immigration. Because in this country, we know that there's a reasonable solution to dealing with our immigration issues, and generally that issue involves, quite frankly, more legal immigration. That is ultimately how we address so many of the challenges with immigration, but it's challenging with the current composition of Congress.
Well, on unlike one of my opponents who believes unless you were born here, you are not a true Washingtonian, I don't believe that. I believe that all of us are Washingtonians, whether you're a 7th generation Washingtonian, whether you moved here for a job, or whether you immigrated here last week. You are part of our city, and you are a valuable part of our city. And we have got to do a lot more to stabilize our healthcare system for our immigrants. That's why last year, when we knew that Republicans were seeking to undermine our ability to expand our Alliance program, which provides healthcare coverage to our immigrants, and we found another way to expand coverage through our local system, even foregoing some federal government funding in order to use those protections. That's why I moved a bill several months ago to ensure that if there's ever use of force by any federal agent in our city, that our officers just share that footage publicly. Because our immigrants who are being terrorized by ICE and have been all year deserve our protection. And we need to all continue to stay together as one community to ensure that everybody has the safety and rights that they deserve.
That sounds great, except that the cooperation between ICE and MPD happened on Brooke Pinto's watch. And residents kept saying, please do something, please do something. And when she didn't, they came to me, and I wrote a bill. And that's when Brooke said, you know what, let me pass a piece of bill too. Like, we can't be okay, ignore this cooperation between ICE and MPD and then act like we're going to care when we become the delegate. But when we become the delegate, I got to give credit to this idea from a woman named Eleanor that I met yesterday who lives in Parkview. She said to me, Robert, I wish members of Congress would have been more active in D.C. neighborhoods when my neighbors couldn't take their kids to school or they're afraid to go to the grocery store. And I said, Eleanor, that is actually a good idea. Because D.C. Council is too vulnerable, right? Like, we can't be in, there's only 13 of us across the city, but Congress is here. And so to say that they care about an issue is one thing, but for them to be in D.C. and people to engage in that way is another thing. That would have been a powerful symbol, not just to the country, but to Congress and to the White House. Those are the types of efforts that I'm going to push.
I take this issue personally as well. My grandparents were born in this country, but their older siblings were not. And in 2 generations, I had extraordinary opportunities in this country, and it's why I have spent my whole career expanding access to justice and trying to build opportunity for people across D.C. and across this country. I will say that we nearly had immigration reform in this country. As difficult as it was in a bifurcated Congress, we nearly had it. And you know who killed it? Donald Trump. Not Donald Trump the president, Donald Trump the candidate. Because he wanted the issue to be live for his campaigns. And he wanted to indulge in the same racist stereotypes against immigrants that he has been indulging in against our city. So we can quibble about the different policy positions, but that's the attack we're under, and we have to be national leaders to fight back against that very dangerous dynamic.
So I think I said a time or two that I worked for Congressman Norton for a while. And so one of the things I did was I worked in the oversight committee. And so what I would do is I would use that committee. I've said very strongly before that I would use the House Oversight Committee to have oversight hearings on ICE specifically. And I think that's what we need to do is we have to draw attention to this critically important issue. And that's the way that you do it. You do that, and then because of those hearings, that's where you can actually start to give real reform. That you use the appropriations process and every other lever in the legislative process.
Thank you. Okay, now we're trying to get a few of these questions in, so we're going to reduce the time to 30 seconds, folks, but you all are accustomed to this. So let's say this question really asks about commending you all for the work or suggesting that you have for getting statehood. But if you were to talk to a Republican from, let's say, Arizona or Utah, or any of the red states, what would you say is the value proposition for statehood for them? And
Well, first and foremost, the Republican Party is supposed to be the party of states' rights, right? That's what they were founded on. And so our lack of autonomy and representation is a fundamental undermining of states' rights, first and foremost. There are some who are bookish and more committed to a principled argument. There are others who are only focused on an economic argument, on the money that it could yield for the federal government. Oh,
I would share with the Republican that both of my grandfathers fought in active duty in wars, only to return to a city where they did not have representation that they fought for overseas. But I know that would not convince that Republican. There is nothing, no value proposition that's going to convince an elected Republican right now. But I will talk to an unelected Republican about values and principles of democracy, and hope that that starts to spread. But there's not going to be any bipartisanship in the agency state in the near future. We've got to be realistic about that.
I agree with that. I don't think we should think about how we're going to approach a generic Republican with this argument, because we're not going to win. What we need to do is shore up our support in our own party and then pick off just the handful of Republicans we will need. And when we pick them strategically, it's not about a moral argument or a political argument or a geopolitical argument that we're the only democracy on earth that hasn't managed to give the voting rights to the residents of the Capitol. It's none of those things. We're just going to have to figure out who influences those specific people, which funders, which lobbyists, which interest groups, and we'll go to them and make our case.
I think we have to make the fundamental argument that we are the same as everybody else. We're 700,000 Americans. We pay the full freight of federal taxes. Not only do we pay all of our federal taxes, we pay more per capita than any state in the country. We contribute more overall to the federal government in taxes than roughly half the states individually. Our residents have fought and died in every single war since the American Revolution. We have done everything to deserve the equality that comes only with statehood.
I wouldn't talk to them about state, but I'd talk to them about federal income taxes. And I would say, I don't think the district should be subject to federal income taxes because we're not a state. And I think I could get that measure passed more easily than the state would bill right now. And then I would let their constituents go to them and say, why is Washington, D.C., whatever it is, not paying federal income taxes? And then I think we actually have a dialogue and a discussion, and then we can begin to actually make progress as a state.
Councilmember White, question is, do you believe that Congresswoman Norton stayed in office too long? We hear that she left because of her poor health, and she, along with many other members of Congress, have served probably half of their lifetimes in Congress. Would you commit, after a certain number of years, to vacate that seat?
I think great leaders build other leaders, and we have to pass the baton and mentor the people who come behind us. That said, when I decided to run for public office, my wife said, I will support you in any office you run for. But when I turn 65, I'm moving to an island, and a man is going to fan me. It's up to you whether you're going to be that man. So I have to turn down.
I commit not to stay in this office for 34 years.
So I just got to say, Congressman Norton, even in the very last Congress that we just finished, was ranked by nonpartisan academics as one of the most effective lawmakers on Capitol Hill. So it's very disconcerting to see, my opponents criticizing the work that we've done even just recently. And so no, I would not stay forever, and I would, listen to the voters. That's essentially who gets to decide. They decided when they re-elected her, and that's what's going to happen after this election as well.
Well, the funny thing about this seat, as all seats in Congress, is actually you only get it for 2 years. And then you have to go out and you have to convince people to support you again. And Eleanor convinced people in the district to support her up until, quite frankly, had she won again in this election, she probably would have won again. So it is a job that has a term limit. It's 2 years. And you have to get signatures again, which I still think is kind of crazy. But it is part of the process. So you get 2 years, you have to make progress in those 2 years, and if you do a good job, people will elect you.
I can only speak for myself as the youngest member of the DC Council in our history, and will hopefully be one of the youngest members of Congress. I think it is time for some new energy and some new thinking about how we not just have great ideas in this role, but how we deliver real results that are going to improve people's lives. That's what I'm focused on. That's what I've been focused on. I think people can do that at all ages throughout their careers in different industries. For me, I will certainly not be in Congress the rest of my life. I think new ideas are important to get injected into the system.
Wow, great. So thank you for the audience questions. They were terrific. I'm sorry we couldn't get them all in. It's time for the final sell. Why should these folks vote for you? Closing statements, we're going to start with Kinney. We're going to go then to Brooke. And then we're going to go down the line with the men. Like that. Go for it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to hear us tonight. And thank you to the hosts, of course. There are only 16 full-time elected positions in this city. There are the 13 members of DC Council, there's the mayor, the attorney general, and the DC delegate. And all of us have to work together to defend DC's rights and advance our interests. If you like the members of DC Council who are in this race, leave them on City Council. They will still be part of the Sweet 16. But for this job, the delegate job, which is a singular, unusual, special, unique opportunity, for this job, send someone to the Hill who has been fighting for DC for 30 years on the national stage and winning. That's what this is a once-in-a-generation chance to take a new look at what this job is and what kind of relationships and experiences and skills are needed. I will be first on the ballot. My name will be first. Please rank me first. Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to our 5 moderators. We know this is serious business, and we have just as many moderators as candidates. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming out. I am running for Congress to deliver wins for all of us, to make sure that we protect our city and our autonomy and achieve statehood finally, to make sure that every Washingtonian can be safe in every single neighborhood across our city, and to ensure that we build an economy that has affordable housing, that has diversified economy, that has opportunities for jobs. And I know we can do this most effectively together. I am bullish and optimistic about what this seat not only has been, but what it can be in the future. I cannot tell you how many people have said to me in this race, I haven't necessarily agreed with every position you've taken on the DC Council, but I know you're going to win for all of us on the Hill. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Let me win for all of us for DC. We deserve some wins, and I can't wait to do it on our behalf. Thank you.
Well, I'm in this race because I like to solve problems. I've done that my entire career in government. I've done it in the private sector. I've done it in the public sector. And DC has challenges. We have challenges from an intrusive federal government. We have challenges from a president who's an autocrat in the making or already. And I have the experience through all the different things I've done in government to solve those problems. I want to help make sure we get statehood by exempting DC residents from federal income taxes. I want to work to get control over our electricity prices so that people aren't forced to choose between their electricity bills and groceries. I want to make sure that we protect the federal workforce, we restore the jobs that are vital for this city. And I want to make sure that we get rid of all the inequalities we have across the district. We are a city of tremendous wealth, and that wealth is not spread everywhere. And the federal government has the tools, and the delegate has the tools with the right person to address those inequalities. And I think I am the right person to do that. So vote for me on June 16th, ranking number 1 or number 2.
I want to thank you all for holding this forum tonight. Thank you to everybody who came. Again, I'm Robert White. I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian. I've worked for Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. I've represented this city on the council, and I'm running for this seat not because it was my plan, but because we are not in normal times. We're in a time where our very home rule, the limited home rule that we have, is under attack. A time when black representation is under attack, a time when democracy is under attack. We have one seat in Congress, no colleagues in the Senate, no vote on the floor. That one person needs to be able to fight every single day for the District of Columbia. They need to know the delegate seat on day one. They need to know this city up and down, left and right, top and bottom. There's only one candidate in this race who is ready on day one because they know the delegate seat, because they know this city, not a part of this city, not a couple parts of the city, but the entire city. This is our fight on the Hill. This is our time to get statehood, to get DC taken seriously by the Democratic Party. I have a strategy, I have a plan, but most importantly, I need your vote. So I'm asking you to rank me number one on your ballot.
Thank you. I'm Trent Holbrook, and for the past 8 years, I've battled arm in arm with Congressman Norton in every single major federal fight for DC's future. Elections are about contrast, and the contrast in this race could not be clearer. No other candidate in this race has guided the DC statehood bill to House passage twice and fought the most historic number of anti-home rule attacks we've had in generations. For example, one member, candidate, Councilmember White, tries to say that we had the same position and same outcomes. We didn't. In fact, the race advancements in our march toward DC statehood came after he left office in the past 8 years when I was working for Congressman Norton. But this isn't about titles. I never dreamed that I would run for public office, but I decided the time right now was too important not to step up. Being delegate isn't a consolation prize for losing a mayoral race. It's an honor of a professional lifetime. And it's one thing to say you'll be a fighter for DC, but it's another thing to have actually delivered for DC at the federal level for a decade. He says he knows DC's history. I worked for Congressman Norton for 8 years, and you better believe I also know DC's history. And more importantly, we made DC's history. So, thank you so much.
I meant to ask this question early on, and I'm going to ask it now. Is there anybody in this audience who came here undecided of who you were going to vote for? Okay. All right. And are you leaving decided? You think so? Yeah. All right. Let's give our candidates a round of applause.
Sorry?
Would you like a tote bag?
Sure, yeah.
I'm going to give you the pamphlet too.